Hello and welcome to Top Story. A Spanish court will today pass verdict on 29 suspects charged in connection with the Madrid train bombings of March the 11th, 2004. Most of the accused are Moroccans, but some come from Spain's million-strong North African community. The explosions wreaked terrible carnage on 4 commuter trains, killing 191 and injuring almost 2,000. It was the worst terrorist attack in Europe since a Pan Am airliner was blown up over the Scottish town of Lockerbie in 1988, killing all 270 people on board. The attack was the first in Europe since the 9/11 strikes in the US 2.5 years before, and ended any sense of complacency about the threat posed by Al-Qaeda. It also revealed for the first time the vulnerability of Europe to so-called homegrown jihadist groups, radical Islamists often brought up and living in Europe, who are inspired by Al-Qaeda but not necessarily directly run by it. The model was to be repeated with devastating effect in London in 2005. Well, joining me now to discuss the significance of the Madrid bombings and the lessons learned from them is Anthony Bélanger, a specialist on Spain at Korea International here in Paris. Anthony, thanks very much for being on Top Story. It's more than 3 years now since the Madrid bombings. Why on earth has it taken such a long time to come to the verdict?
Well, first of all, because they have to judge or to make an investigation over more than 29 people. And the second reason is that they had to make a very, very precise investigation, because it was really a trauma. You can understand it was a trauma for a country like Spain. Even in a country like Spain, used to terrorism, never forget that Spain is one of those European countries who has to deal with the terrorism for more than 30 years. But the scale is completely different, and the trauma was really huge. Not only because it killed more than about 200 people, 191 people, and injured more than 2,000. And also because it was a political affair, Remember exactly when it happened. We were in 2004. It was a year after the intervention in Iraq, and Spain was one of the major partners of the Americans in Iraq. And the Spanish government of that period of time, Mr. José María Aznar, faced a major confrontation with his own population. The Spanish population is basically against the war for historical reason. You can imagine, the war in Spain has a very, very precise background for them. So it came a year after that, and then they were about to vote. It was 3 days
before the election.
3 days before the general elections. So it was a very crucial moment. Everything was a little bit concentrated in those days.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, I was saying that the investigation has to be very quiet. And has to be very fair, and has to be very accepted by everybody, because it was a very controversial matter.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. One of the things that's peculiar about the Madrid bombings is how divisive they have been. If you compare them, for instance, with New York or with London, which united societies, the Madrid bombings seem to have divided Spanish society.
Well, first of all, the whole history of Spain is an history of division. There is more moment of division in Spain, of the two Spains, between the right band and the left bands, between the Republicans during the Civil War and the Nationalists during the Civil War, and in generally speaking, between the people who think that Spain has to be united in a state and people who think no, Spain has to be separated in different regions. There is always a story of political divisions in Spain, and in moments of truth, Spain is always more a divided country than a united one, and it's what happened in that time too. Divided between those who thought that the general election has been stalled to the Popular Party, the right band, the right parties.
Well, the Popular Party, even to this day, which was the ruling party at the time of the bombing, even to this day, blames ETA, the Basque separatist organization, for the attack.
Not really. The Popular Party is more clever than that. It lets some newspapers to say so. There is a newspaper in Spain called El Mundo, and El Mundo made a massive press attack against the Socialist Party for more than 4 years, accusing them to lie to the Spanish people, not saying that, for example, there was a bit of participation of ETA, because it was the very first clue, the very first thing the Popular Party at this time said to the Spanish people. It was not. Remember, they said that it was ETA and not an Islamic attack, which was obviously wrong. And we can say now that they were lying. They knew from the very first second that it was not an attack from ETA, but it was an attack from an Islamic point. But they never admitted it.
But the extraordinary thing is that, at least according to one recent opinion poll in Spain, as many as 30% of the population still think it possible that ETA was behind it.
Yes, because, well, you always lie. Even if you lie, there will always be a trace, something about it. Yes, it's true that, and the story of something they don't tell you and which is true is always very popular, within the population. And above all, it's a very good sign, it's a very good way to see what I told you about. Spain is always a divided country between two bands that are there are in some moments of the history, for example, they were united for a slight moment during the constitutional process at the end of the Franquist period, and at the beginning of the 80s, for example, or the end of the 70s. But then it was over, Really, Spain is the entire modern story of Spain is a story of division.
Actually, one of the other things about the Madrid bombings, which sort of marked it out from New York, was that so many of those involved were brought up in Spain. That's a departure in this sort of jihadist terrorist attacks.
Well, that was the fact, in London. But they were not really brought up in Spain. They were working in Spain more than anything. Spain is a very new country for immigration. Now it's one of the major immigration countries in Europe because it did it so. But it's very new for Spain. So they were living in Spain more than anything. And never forget that Spain at that period of time was one of the major. Clearly for the people who commit those suicide bombings. Those bombings, not suicide at all. It was a matter of punishing Spain and the Spanish government. One of the first questions, one of the suspects asked when he was arrested, it was something like 2 days after the bombings, was who won the election? And it's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted first to punish the Spanish government of the Popular Party, and second, to make as many dead as possible.
Briefly, because we're running out of time, what damage has this done to relations between Spaniards and the Muslim minority in Spain? Very briefly.
I think that, Spanish is a modern country. So, according to a recent poll, there is not really, they could make the difference between those people. And thanks of this investigation, which was very well done and very long, everything could be explained to the Spanish people, that those people didn't have anything to do with the Muslim community.
OK, I'm going to have to end it there, I'm afraid. Thanks very much to Anthony Bélanger of Courier International. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.